Last episode, we were exploring Hillforts along the line of the South Downs, and we made it out of Hampshire and into West Sussex. Well, this week, we're carrying on across the Downs. And to begin, down there, that's Worthing. Now, I'll just be honest, it's not exactly the cultural capital of the South. Sorry, Worthing residents, but growing up in Cheshire for 20 years, not once did any of my friends or acquaintances say, "Come on everyone, let's go to Worthing." However, if you drive north out of town and into the hills, you'll encounter not just some wonderful Saxon churches and windmills, but before long, and no word of exaggeration, one of the most remarkable Iron Age sites in the country, Sisbury Ring, is an absolute monster. We began this series in my current home county of Dorset, where I took quite some pride in saying that we have some of the finest examples in Britain. And while, yes, the offerings from the Downs have so far been a mixed bag, Sisbury, with its 24-hectare area, gives even the mighty Hillforts of Dorset a run for their money. Its absolutely vast scale dwarfs most of the other Hillforts in the area to a near laughable degree, which raises a large number of entirely legitimate questions, many of which, sadly, we will be unable to answer satisfactorily. As with all societies, without literacy, we have no writings to illuminate the thoughts and motivations of those who built Sisbury. We can only look back at what has survived and make our best inferences, but we're not entirely without lines of inquiry. To go back to the earliest levels of occupation, last week we briefly looked at Harrow Hill with its flint mines, a series of pockmarks where the flint was mined as far back as the Neolithic. Flint mining in the Neolithic is never just about extracting a resource. It's very clear that these places were treated as something special, even something sacred. There appears to be a pattern of placing things in these mines, almost as if in exchange, perhaps a sense of giving gifts back to the earth. And perhaps since flint was such a crucial resource in a society before metalwork, it's maybe unsurprising that it was seen as more than just a tool, but almost a lifeblood of the community. Nowadays, these mines appear just as dips in the grass, but when initially dug, these would have been up to 12 metres deep. So this site that held so much significance in the Neolithic is then later transformed into a hill fort in the Iron Age. You've seen that pattern already in plenty of spaces, and you're going to see plenty more. The huge ditch and bank you're seeing is mainly work from the Middle Iron Age, from around 400 BC. And while the use of the site stretching back undoubtedly heightened its significance, the Middle Iron Age population cutting the ramparts was not entirely reverential during their construction of the fort, as at points they're cutting through these Neolithic mines. But despite its massive size, and bear in mind, when originally cut, the ditches would have actually been 5 feet deeper than they are now, there is not a lot of evidence of Iron Age occupation, or at least the evidence is not all that clear. In the late Iron Age, around 100 BC, we have evidence of a field system in the interior, but unlike other large hill forts we've looked at so far, where surveys have uncovered a large number of hut circles, at Maiden Castle, for example, at one point there was even an organised street plan, and Hambledon also has ample hut platforms in the interior. At Sisbury, this is not evident. Surveys of the interior have produced something of an ambiguous picture, and that doesn't appear to leave the door open for dense settlement where every available space is packed with roundhouses. It just adds more mystery to the place. It might be surprising, but there it is. We have this massive space with ramparts that look like they could withstand just about anything, and yet, as best we can tell, it is curiously sparse. We have some use in the Roman period, though again, don't picture the whole place filled with Roman buildings, rather a modest cluster of around 11 rectangular buildings, about 11 by 5 metres, clustered around the eastern entrance. Well, can't lie, on scale alone, it's going to be difficult to top that for the rest of the episode, but let's roll the intro. Well, no real surprise here. I have a real soft spot for the hill forts across the Downs. On a fine day, this is an incredible place to be. And in fact, I don't normally dedicate episodes, but on this occasion, I'm dedicating this one to my parents. It has been one of the great joys of the last few years as I've been doing more and more filming for the channel that I've had these special days and journeys I've been able to share with my folks. It's been a wonderful thing that we've been able to connect over. And I'm also very grateful for their patience as we shuttle between sites and old churches with varying levels of obscurity. But it's been a real pleasure to get that time together. So moving along from Sisbury, and if you head due north, one that's always been just a bit special. This is Chanctonbury Ring. And at first glance, just a clump of trees, but on a second look, you can see the ramparts emerging at the edge. There are Bronze Age barrows in the landscape, though these are not as easy to spot, and discovered in excavations in 1909, in later centuries there had been a Romano-British temple built in the centre of the enclosure. This has a not entirely dissimilar footprint to the remains at Maiden Castle, which I'm showing you here. You can see these tessera that were found there in the Worthing Museum. In the storm of 87, a large number of trees were down, and in advance of replanting, it allowed some further archaeology to be performed. Small note, by the way. First visit, I parked down below to the north in the car park there and proceeded to head upwards, but looking at the path that snakes away to the east before making you double back west, that seemed too circuitous. So, seeing there was something of a path directly up the slope, I decided that that was the way to go. Fam, do not try and go up the slope. I was fortunate that despite being autumn, it hadn't rained for a few days. Otherwise, this slope would have been as grippy as a slip and slide made entirely of butter. But even being able to grab branches and trunks to haul myself up, I know this isn't actually a 45-degree slope, but it sure felt like it. Chanctonbury demands quite the walk, regardless of your start point. Well, next along, and somewhat less likely to get the pulse racing, unavoidably, thanks to the plough, Thunderbarrows Hill has been left pretty slight. Protruding on a chalk spur overlooking what is now Shoreham and Southwick on the south coast, there's quite a series of occupation layers around the site. Thundersbarrow Hill survives as a pretty slight enclosure. This is a univalate hill fort from around the Iron Age, but it's actually a later work that surrounds what was originally a Bronze Age Martin Down type enclosure. There's also the remains of a Romano-British settlement, and under the right conditions, the field system is just about visible as a crop mark to the south. However, while this is all good for the archaeology, and there were excavations done in 1932, there's not a tremendous amount I can show you from above ground. Now, while Thunderbarrows Hill... Wait, is it Thundersbarrow or Thunderbarrows? Thundersbarrow, right. Well, it might not be the most exciting prehistoric site you see all year. This is at least what doing historical episodes looks like. If there's one thing that's an antidote to the absolute nihilism of flooding the internet with AI garbage and straight up unashamedly incorrect information, I dread to think how many years it'll be before we flush some of the AI lies from the collective bloodstream. And based on how long incorrect information has stuck around to this point, possibly never. But the antidote is actually getting out and filming these places ourselves. It's something that's always been the highest priority for us. If we're going to talk about a place, we don't want to just loop the same 5 unrelated stock assets over and over or pull some grainy JPEGs. We've spent the last 6+ years traveling and trying to get to as many of these places as we can, both in the UK and around Europe and beyond. And look, we're doing our best. Our gear is pretty basic. I do not have the money to be dropping 4 figures on camera lenses, and we've pretty much taken trips in the cheapest way conceivable, whether it's staying in hostels, overnight Flixbus rides, or just getting out and walking 2 hours to a place. At the very least, if you can support creators like us who are bending over backwards and spending hundreds and hundreds of largely unpaid hours in a year to try and get the best, well-sourced information out there in a form that's accessible to a wider audience, what really gives me hope, there is so much potential for learning on YouTube. The last decade has been an absolute renaissance for material that can be used to help people learn all sorts and just from the comfort of their couch. But yes, we need your help to do so. Even a handful of weeks ago, our reach was still choked to barely a couple of hundred. Meanwhile, anyone Atlantis posting with an AI thumbnail is getting like 1 million clicks in the first 24 hours. So yes, to help us out further, we've already mentioned all the stuff there is to see in the Hillforts playlist, but how about, to choose at random, the episode we made on Roman Merida. It's a town in Spain that has the most ludicrous collection of unbelievable Roman sites, but the platform didn't seem to put that out to barely anyone, so yeah, why not cue that up for next? Well, moving along and heading northeast, this massive space is Devil's Dyke, and while an amazing place with great views, perhaps suffers from being a little too popular, the interior being dotted with, amongst other things, a large car park and a pub. By the way, regards titles, while that is the correct name for this site, and I'm sure all the level-headed among you know that that is a term to denote a ditch or bank, I remain a little concerned that the auto-detect of this platform might flip out and think we're using slurs, so hopefully that doesn't happen. The title is actually referring to this depression, which is, strikingly sheer and vast. But to explain it properly, I'd have to spend some time explaining solufluction, and we're mainly here for the ancient history. We can't cover everything from every topic in these episodes. During Victorian times, this place was practically a theme park with a funicular railway constructed to get people up there, 2 bandstands, a fairground and an observatory. But the ramparts are surviving pretty well. Excavations of the interior uncovered a roundhouse as well as some pits from around 50 BC to 50 AD, as well as evidence of continued use into the Roman period. Exploring it today, the road slices the enclosure in two, with this large bank still visible on the north and west side, but there's also this portion to the south and west. While I couldn't get quite high enough to fit all of this in, the whole place is not dissimilar to Sisbury Ring in form and shape. It's just harder to perceive with all the modern clutter there. And yeah, on a fine day, the views from up here are pretty special. You might not be able to make it out at this distance, but it has a good line of sight to Chanctonbury, and not much further to the northeast. Love this one. This is Wolstonbury Hill. This one needs a short walk to reach, but not that this would normally bear remarking on. You can actually reach this trail by bus. I say this because if you've ever attempted to catch some of Britain's prehistoric sites by public transport alone, you'll know what a thankless, or in fact functionally impossible task it can be. Wolstonbury is a largely Bronze Age enclosure, although it may be several overlain on top of each other. The main visible ramparts are described as Wolstonbury C, with A and B as faintly visible concentric lines in the centre, while at other sites, pits and depressions can be signs of either storage pits, huts, or all kinds of features. In this case, it was actually flint mining done in the 17 and 1800s, hence the interior is quite disturbed. What may have once been a barrow is now gone. There are reports of all sorts of finds during the flint mining, but these appear to have disappeared into private collections. Anyway, I have very fond memories of this one. I was catching this just as the light was going on a surprisingly fine November day, which I'd spent chasing Hillforts on, yes, public transport. However, because of the west to east direction of this episode, we're going to be seeing them in reverse order. Oh well. Unrelated to that day, away to the east, this is Ditchling Beacon. I'd gone back and forth whether to include this, as there's not a tremendous amount visible, but I did want to complete the set as much as I could. Apparently, this is the highest point in East Sussex. Well, here it is. You can see there's sort of a bite missing out of it, and a mixture of plough damage and infill has kind of left the ramparts pretty hard to see. On the day, I couldn't really perceive this, so it's not really framed properly, sorry, but it appears the ramparts are just about perceivable as a crop mark in the adjoining field to the west under the right conditions. Obviously, lovely countryside around there. Heading further south into the outer suburban area of Brighton, I've actually been blessed with an extremely wide aerial shot of this one. Now surrounded on three sides by a golf course, this is Hollingbury Hillfort, a roughly square enclosure. There was an early enclosure here in the late Bronze Age or possibly early Iron Age, but likely just a hedged animal pound. But excavations in the 1930s and 60s dated the site as we see it now to around 600 BC, as well as 5 roundhouses dating to about the same time in the southwestern corner. It saw later reuse in the early Roman period, including a feature that may be a Romano-British temple. The ramparts are surviving pretty well. Well, carrying on to the east, we reach the town of Lewes, a personal favourite for a number of reasons that are not all that hard to see, but this is all the famous Norman and medieval stuff in Lewes. To reach the next hill fort, there isn't really a convenient or short way, and this was that November day I mentioned. It was particularly fine, if chilly. Getting out of town and ascending the slope that contains the white chalk cliffs visible from the town, you pass a golf course, and after you've gone up and down the slopes, you finally get to Mount Caburn. This is a great one. It's a well-formed enclosure, not the largest or best defined in the land, but ended up having such a good day. It's always stuck out as a highlight. I've not been keeping a tally, but the number of hill forts that I visit, and later when I'm doing further research, there's some Bronze Age barrows in the vicinity, and you scrub back through your footage like, where? Of course, archaeologically, what is visible on the surface of the British landscape is essentially the tip of the iceberg, so we shouldn't be at all surprised if a feature that is technically extant doesn't always have a flickering neon sign planted on it marked Bronze Age Barrow. I mean, you get a bit of a spidey sense for spotting these after a while, but, we're only human. There's one by the northeastern gate here, for example, but you could be excused for not Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at that straight away. Based on what we've seen so far, the chronology of the site is a little unusual. There were 2 wooden buildings found in the middle of the fort dated around 300 BC, and these appear to be part of an unenclosed settlement. The ditches appear to have been dug around 100 BC, about the time many hill forts in southern England generally, and Sussex specifically, were going out of use. And going further, sometime around AD 43, it appears extra defensive work is being done, with the digging of an extra ditch on the north side here, where there's level ground, so there's no slope to add to the defences. But furthermore, evidence of burning at the northeast gate, followed by the abandonment of the site shortly after, does point to the occupants mounting an unsuccessful defence. There was possible reuse of the site in the late Roman or early medieval, but as far as Sussex views on a sunny November day, it's pretty special. Now, something we're going to have to remark upon, though for reasons you'll see in a moment, we're kind of sneaking this in. The Long Man of Wilmington is a geoglyph on a hillside a little way north of Eastbourne. I'm overdue a revisit here. You can see the later afternoon sun was not my friend, and there's a long bower I need to see on the ridge above it. Now, geoglyphs can cause people a little confusion because the most famous one, for example, the Uffington Horse, has a pretty secure Bronze Age date, but it is unique in that regard. As far as geoglyphs go, there's a series of horses across Wiltshire that are gorgeous, but all from various times over the last 300 years. There was a recent study which dated the Cernavass giant to the Saxon period, which was pretty much the last thing anyone was expecting, but so not the place to get into that here. The Long Man of Wilmington then, well, what do you think? If you don't know the answer to this, place your bets now. Well, I love the design. It certainly looks ancient. I'm totally here for it. But, well, look, just about every possible dating option, from Neolithic to Romano-British to Viking, has been suggested with various justifications. But a 2003 study gave a strong indication this was cut sometime between the 15 to 1600s, one of the main reasons being a major movement of the slope before then that would have destroyed any earlier work. I realise that's probably a bit of a disappointing answer. Earliest drawing we have of it is from the 1700s. It's definitely a great piece of art in a great piece of the English landscape. You can still appreciate how ancient it appears, even if it's only 400 to 500 years old. And heading south, we end up at the coast for our last fort for this episode. And that November day I keep mentioning, though in reverse, just to confuse everyone, well, it started off with the earliest train I could get, then a bus, and then a walk, and finally a glorious sunrise at this point at the eastern end of the Seven Sisters. Now, this is one of England's finest stretches of coastline, and I'm a Dorset resident, so you can consider that particularly high praise. There's a modern lighthouse and a fairly slight hill fort known as BELLE TOUT. One of the tricky things with the site, given it does abut the cliffs, is making an estimate of by how much the coastline has receded due to erosion. This field survey report from 1996 estimates it could be as little as 350 metres since 3000 BC. So we know we've lost some of the site, we just can't tell exactly how much. The paper I'm working from here cites Miles Russell, and I feel like I'm falling into the habit of mentioning him like 2 to 3 times an episode, as he would almost certainly be the first to say other Iron Age archaeologists are available. But yes, this report is citing an as yet unpublished paper from Miles that is being published soon, so I'll look forward to having a look over that. Well, that's us pretty much done for this episode, but we have an outstanding order of business, and also something which I feel is going to make people dislike us. Well, outstanding business first. The late Iron Age tribes in southern Britain. We're pulling a bunch of threads together for this, so you'll forgive me, you're going to need a bit of context for how this works. There are numerous versions of this sort of map. Pretty much everyone just draws their own, so pardon me if I just borrow an existing one. But it's less a map, more a schematic. You see, the reasons you can attempt this, hey, actually, some of you might already know the answer to this. So, quick, sketch the answers down in your copybooks now, and pens down. We have Ptolemy's geography. Bear in mind, this is not a map that he drew, it's a piece of writing, and it includes fleetingly short descriptions of areas of Britain and a pinch of connecting information on which we have to lean an unwise amount of weight. To augment this, the way the Romans decided to politically organise their new territory, it seems to be pretty much on the basis of existing political divides. They seem in little mood, certainly in the core zone to the south, to upend things or shuffle much around. So yeah, we have questions, but you would be surprised how much weight the existence of a Roman civitas is for a territorial unit or tribe. Doubling back to Venta Belgarum, that's Roman Winchester, that title, that is one of the main pieces of evidence for this area being the territory of the Belgae. But the problem is who the Belgae were, and if you've caught the discussion so far, you'd know that the particulars of the Belgic invasions are a major gap in our understanding. You might have your hand up at the back of the class like, Sir, what about the pottery or numismatic evidence? To which I'd say, your vocabulary is a little too good. I'm starting to suspect you might be a straw man. Coins, that's numismatics, are less helpful than we'd really like. Barry Cunliffe gives the example of Kent as an area where evidence from coinage gives us quite a muddled picture, quite possibly pointing to a territory that is disputed. And truthfully, they're not using coins in the same economic models that we're used to. They're not fungible at every marketplace. You have to think of the Iron Age more in terms of cycles of reciprocal exchange. But worst of all, hanging over all of this is the question of the Belgic invasion, and I have to raise the inflection of my voice when I say that phrase, otherwise you can't detect the verbal question mark. Caesar gives us this sentence. Look, here it is. Now, that seems pretty unambiguous, but first of all, sorry to break it to you, but you can't always just take the Roman sources at face value. Just don't at me. And if you saw our third episode where we actually took the time to explain the chronologies that we used to use for Iron Age dating, it's a massive open question when and by how much these invasions happened, and the degree to which this changed the landscape in southern Britain. We used to be all, that must be the change we see around 100 BC, where the Hillforts go out of use, it's somewhat sudden, the timing appears to fit. There you go, solved it for you. I don't have the time to unpack why, but no. That is an old model of thinking that we have now largely moved away from. But, well, not only the BELLE guy, but the Atrebates and the Regni, these are the tribe around Chichester, hence why Chichester became Noviomagus Reginorum, except that name is technically a modern combination drawing from several sources, and as Miles points out in Bloodlines, there are so many variations in the handful of inscriptions we have for these names derived from what we think are tribal names, and I can just feel the ground opening up before me as I'm typing all of this. Every part I chip off this whole model, 3 more chunks fall off it, so I am just going to hard cut here, only to say, yes, overly simplistic model of the late Iron Age political picture in southern Britain looks like this, but worst of all, after all of that, and again, if you've been paying attention with this season, you've already arrived at this answer, these tribes are not the Hillfort builders.
You are not the father.
They're not. The timing just doesn't line up at all. We have this general model we see of Hillforts largely going out of use around 100 BC, and along the downs these are replaced by oppida or settlements more along the coast than in the hills. And so then, addressing the issues we have around Iron Age tribal territories does not in fact get us any closer to understanding the people who built the Hillforts. And to just really pour cold water on this, yeah, we have no names for the peoples who built the Hillforts in the early to mid-Iron Age. You didn't miss it, sorry to disappoint, but we simply do not have any written history that can illuminate that. None. Okay, so with that done, and if I haven't managed to do this already, time to make people slightly angry. You know, not including the people who take the time out of their day to say how much they hate the music. Yeah, thanks for that. You're the salt of the earth. But we've got as far as East Sussex. Kent would be next, but, okay, Kent has Hillforts, but gosh darn it, if they aren't all buried under trees, or buried under trees, or possibly buried under trees. I already said last week, you know, since we have to draw the line somewhere rather than attempt all, let's quick tally here, 4,147 Hillforts on the Hillfort Atlas of Great Britain. These are videos, and the medium is the message, so if there's next to nothing for me to film, no one's going to thank me for trying to film it. It's not that Kent is historically or archaeologically insignificant, really the very opposite. I mean, the Canterbury Museum has some great stuff from the Iron Age, and Kent has some of my favourite Roman forts, and much more besides. It's just not a good hill-forting spot. I know. Feel free to throw whichever academic text you have nearest to hand at the screen now. I shall give you one. This, which is anachronistically called Caesar's Camp, is just above Folkestone. It's pretty awesome. It's out in the open to see. However, the Normans were in full agreement that this was a good spot to fortify, so they set around making a fortress of their own. You can see the motte here, and that does confuse the picture of the Iron Age works somewhat. In fact, a lot of the places I look are only prepared to give this the designation of possible Iron Age fort. So there you go, a Kent hill fort. Somewhat. Just while I'm getting people in the southeast angry with me, not a lot to show from the home counties either. You know, further up East Anglia, we're going to have some fun with Norfolk and some of the hill forts that decided they could do without the hill. But other than the highly obvious adage that I can't be everywhere at once, I'm having to prioritise the places where the hill forts are clear in the landscape. I can't just be train spotting these all the time. I've got to keep something of a normie lens of what would a non-ancient history nerd still consider a worthwhile day out if I took them up there. You know, I don't think I'm going to be able to talk my way out of this hole, but next time we're going to be circling back west, and honestly, there's no tidy travelling salesman way of linking up these hill fort regions, so I'm just going to do it messily. So if you've been enjoying the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can find it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's a great place to do it. But do also have a flick back through the channel and watch some more episodes, whether it's more episodes in this rapidly growing Hillfort series or some of the other episodes that we mentioned. Otherwise, you can follow us on Blue Sky, and we'll catch you very soon.